Hey there stranger, my name is miizmi, and once a week I make videos discussing movies that I find particularly interesting. And since last week I discussed one of the more problematic versions of Cinderella, today I decided to talk about indisputably the best Cinderella movie in existence, Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, and much like Bambi 2, most people I talk to don't even know its existence, let alone appreciate it for the masterpiece that it is. It's just such a shame because this movie has it all: revenge, romance, redemption, and time travel, all in a story that's interesting enough for adults to enjoy, but simple enough for children to understand. So today, I basically just want to use this as an excuse to gush about how much I love this movie because there's not too many people I think in real life that will let me do that, so YouTube it is. So the movie opens up with a fun song showing how differently Cinderella and her step-family's life turned out. Cinderella is happily married and enjoying her blissful life while her stepsisters are miserable and resentful as they struggle with chores for the first time in their lives. Anastasia yearns to experience true love and decides to follow Cinderella and Prince Charming as they ride into the forest where she learns of the fairy godmother and her magic wand.
So that's how Cinderella did it. Magic.
What could ever come between us?
I would gladly volunteer.
Which lands at her feet because for someone so powerful, the godmother is quite blasé and careless about it. Anastasia rushes home to show her findings to her family, who doubts her claim.
A stick.
Ooh, let's beat her with it.
Until godmother shows up and warns of the danger of it in the wrong hands. The two fight over the wand, turning Lucifer into a hybrid goose before godmother is turned into a statue. Lady Tremaine is elated at what this means for them.
Power. Riches. Revenge. I call upon all the forces of the universe. Bippity boppity boo!
She turns back the hands of time, taking them back to the moment the Grand Duke arrived at their house to try on the glass slipper. She uses magic to make the shoe fit Anastasia. I really like the fact that they made Anastasia the one that fit the shoe because in the original she was the one that faked fitting the shoe. They are sadly dance around in joy, and as they head off to the castle, Cinderella makes her appearance confused and distressed. Lady Tremaine ends up breaking her glass slipper, using her cane once again, threatens her before heartlessly telling her to clean up the mess.
Oh, and, clean up that broken glass.
Cinderella is heartbroken, but the mice encourage her to speak to the prince as they surely remember her, so she rushes to the castle and sneaks in through the servants' entrance and pretends to be the royal mouse catcher when stopped by the head of servants. Once inside, the mice and her go their separate ways to find the prince. Meanwhile, the prince and the king are fencing as they discuss his desire to marry the girl who fits the slipper. The king ridicules the prince's reasoning, telling him that the true reason to marry should be for refinement and breeding, rather than her footwear. Which isn't totally consistent with the king's character because from the beginning he's the one that truly wanted the prince to be married while the prince himself just followed along. And throughout the movie you can see how insistent and adamant the king is about the wedding.
I want this wedding to go off without a hitch. And if it doesn't, please tell me that this is the girl you intend to marry.
Well, does anyone want to marry my son?
And more so if you look back to the original movie, where he not only scoffed at the idea of marrying for love,
His silly romantic ideas?
But sire, in matters of love...
Love. Ha! Just a boy meeting a girl under the right conditions.
but outright dismisses the concerns about upbringing as long as the prince chose someone to marry.
So, he's proposed already. Tell me all about it.
Well, sire...
Who is she? Where does she live?
But I didn't get a chance.
No matter, we've more important things to discuss. Arrangements for the wedding, invitations, a national holiday.
Once he saw Prince Charming's interest in Cinderella at the ball, despite not knowing her identity, he states that he doesn't care where she lives as long as the prince proposed at the end of the night. And once learning that she ran away, but the prince declared he'd marry the girl who fits the slipper, the king was ecstatic. And
Prince, sire, swears he'll marry none but the girl who fits this slipper.
He said that, did he? Ha ha! We got him!
Sire, this slipper may fit any number of girls.
That's his problem. He's given his word. We'll hold him to it.
and in fact, didn't care who fit the slipper as long as the prince was married so he could have grandchildren to spoil.
It's high time he married and settled down.
I want to see my grandchildren before I go.
So it makes sense that Disney would want to modernize the king a little bit and make it so that he doesn't just want a breeding mare for his son. Although technically he did mention breeding as a requirement for the bride earlier, so it also gave him the role of pointing out what many people have criticized about Cinderella from the get-go. But when you think about it, the princess method isn't actually that crazy or illogical because it's been shown throughout both movies that the glass slippers are unusually small. Maybe not small enough to only fit one of Anastasia's toes, but still small enough to not fit any other woman in the land. So we can conclude that Cinderella's shoes are quite small. There's also probably the fact that it's magic glass slipper, so I wouldn't be completely surprised if it was made to only fit her. Even though the prince doesn't know they're made of magic, he does know they're made of glass, unlike other common materials such as leather and canvas, which means they're not pliable and quite rigid in form. That means it would have to be custom fit to Cinderella, and even if someone was to have a similar size shoe as her, it would be very unlikely that they would have the same arches and width of their foot to be able to fully fit the shoe. Of course, then I did think about if it's molded to her so perfectly, how come she lost one of them at the end of the night? But we had to take into consideration that she was dancing all night, and all that sweat that accumulated plus the non-porous nature of the glass, it's surprising that she was able to keep them on for that long to begin with. Anyways, back to the story. The sound of fanfare, the prince excitedly rushes out to meet Cinderella, but is instead disappointed to see Anastasia, and awkwardly tries to explain that she isn't who he's looking for.
It's just that I was expecting, well, someone else. I really do feel awful about this.
But the royal proclamation declared...
Yes, but it would appear that more than one girl actually fits the slipper. I'm very sorry to have inconvenienced you.
Which leads Lady Tremaine to cast a spell on him, causing him now to remember Anastasia as the one he danced with. He proposes to her, which causes another adorable, charming outburst of uncontained excitement from Anastasia before he rushes off to tell the king. The mice also rush off to tell Cinderella what they saw. Meanwhile, Cinderella is almost discovered by Lucifer, but spots Prince and flirts with him. I'm not gonna lie, I die of secondhand embarrassment every time I see this scene because it makes me so uncomfortable. Just imagine being so confident and getting out there and being flirted with a guy, knowing that he wants you, only for him to turn around and be like, I don't even know you. That's just so embarrassing.
I'm sorry, have we met? Well, maybe you've mistaken me for some other prince.
I mean, to be fair for her, she does have a reason to be flirty with him, and the only reason why he doesn't recognize her is because of magic, but still, it just hurts my heart deep down. I do love the fact that he ultimately ends up rejecting her in the scene though, because it goes to show that his love for Cinderella isn't solely based on her looks, because once it's put into his mind that Anastasia was his mystery woman, he ends up being faithful to her despite the fact that Cinderella is one of the most beautiful women in the land. I mean, he does have a moment where he stumbles and the magic is almost lifted, but he stays loyal to Anastasia despite her not actually being Cinderella. I really do like that fact, and it makes their love seem more real. Prince Charming ends up telling Cinderella of his upcoming wedding to Anastasia, which takes her back, and she goes to tell him that's wrong, but the head of servants interrupts and takes her away to deal with the mice in the cellar. There, the mice catch her up and tell her about the spell, and they plan to steal the wand back. The Duke leads the stepfamily into a room for the reception with an already prepared banquet of food, and while the Duke and Lady Tremaine discuss the wedding arrangement with disdain towards each other, the sisters start a food fight that ends with the massive wedding cake landing on Anastasia right as the prince brings the king in to meet her. In an attempt to redeem the situation and show off her refinement, they dance, if you can even call it that, which ends with her tripping on her own dress and ripping off one of his epaulets. And what we see on top is all the clinking noises that Anastasia makes as she clomps around in these what are supposed to be very delicate, elegant shoes.
Right. Raise and poise. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Because Anastasia is a little too enthusiastic, she doesn't have quite the elegance that Cinderella has, and I really do like that they showcase the difference in that way, and that it's a bit of symbolism to show that even though Anastasia is able to fit the shoe, she's not the actual proper fit. The king calls for an audience with Anastasia alone while the princess whisks off for his fitting, and rather than being angry, the king tells her about his queen, who is just as bad as dancing but very loving towards him. He tells her about the many riches and land she will receive as a princess, but instead gives her his most prized possession, the seashell that the king and queen found at the same time, leading them to fall in love. Anastasia heads back to her room, all happy and blissful, and tells her mom that she's had a change of mind and wants to experience the prince's love without magic involved. While the mice sneak in to steal the wand and cause Lucifer to create a mess, giving Cinderella an opportunity to enter disguised as a maid. But her timing was too suspicious and Lady Tremaine discovers her identity. The mice take off and the guards appear out of nowhere and give chase while the birds lead the prince to Cinderella. The mice toss the wand to Cinderella and she starts to undo the spell on the prince, but she hesitated way too long, getting lost in his eyes or something, and is captured by the guards, and then Lady Tremaine orders her to be shipped away and banished from the land forever. The prince goes to see his father, expressing some concerns because he's starting to question things. He then sees the mice beckoning him to follow them into a supply closet, and he really starts to question his sanity, but they sing to him Cinderella's story.
Well, her name was Cinderella, she's the servant girl you met. She's the one you want to marry. Don't forget. With a magic wand, she cast a wicked spell. Which is why poor Princey isn't feeling well. Not so well. You've forgotten Cinderella and the dance she shared last night. But we know it's not too late to set things right. Cause at the ball, Cinderella was the maiden at the ball.
And he comes to the realization that they're telling him the truth because of the whole hand situation. And by that, I mean in this movie, true love is signified by the touching of the hands, with the king and the queen touching hands when they reach for the seashell at the same time, Prince Charming and Cinderella touching hands as they dance. And his suspicions all began once he touched Anastasia's right before they danced.
Something's wrong. Well, just now when I touched her hand, I felt nothing.
But when Cinderella brushed his before she got carried away, he felt a spark. So he takes off to go save her, and his father questions his sanity for bringing up talking mice and forbids him to continue down the stair, which leads to the best scene in all of animated cinematic history. No, all of cinematic history, period. Because the prince literally just throws himself out the window. Like, just one dives out of there so casually and then just rides off. I just love the fact that they gave him more of a personality in this movie. First with him being all like awkward when trying to reject Anastasia, and now to just literally throwing himself out of windows. That's a great personality quirk. And this isn't even the last time we see him go flying in the movie either. Anyways, the king chooses not to send his troops off to get the prince, presumably because it's the first time he's ever seen such passion and conviction from his son. The prince rides to the empty town, which might have been the entire movie. All of the scenery just felt so empty because there's barely any characters. From the first movie, they already cut Bruce the dog and all but 4 of her birds and mice. But even the background characters seem very lacking, especially with the guards. The first thing when Cinderella entered the castle, you can see how many guards line the staircase just to let people into a ball. And yet when you see the guards posted at the gate, or to chase after Cinderella and later the stepmother, there's usually only 3 guards. But anyways, the prince ends up being flown off his horse onto the ship, because he just really likes to fly in this movie, and destroys one of the sails. I guess it's fine because he probably owns the ship, and even if he doesn't, he's a prince, so no one's really gonna complain. They touch hands and he's able to break the spell and proposes to her. And while they arrive back at the castle, Lady Tremaine breaks the news to Anastasia that the prince left for Cinderella. Just a little odd that she waited so long since she was originally there when he first took off, and seeing that he had to go across town and back, and the fact that the sun is starting to set when he finally does, it means there's been a couple of hours during that time, and for some reason she didn't decide to tell Anastasia already or make plans to escape. But the guards pound the door, so they vanish. As Cinderella prepares for her wedding with the help of the birds and mice, Lady Tremaine appears in the shadow and reveals Anastasia described as Cinderella, which, let me tell you, completely blew my mind as a kid. And it's also part of the reason why I have this weird fear of the people I love not being able to differentiate the real me if a twin of mine was to suddenly appear. Also, I realized that just made me sound like I do have a twin, just randomly out and about, but I don't. Just saying that if there ever was a twin or a clone version of me that was to come here, would people actually be able to tell the difference between me and them? I don't know, and that kind of freaks me out. But anyways, Lady Tremaine sends Cinderella away into a more sinister version of her original pumpkin carriage, with the human Lucifer as an coachman in an intense scene that was actually quite scary as a kid. And if I'm being a little bit nitpicky, I honestly kind of wish that they never included an action scene to begin with, because you don't really have to be an action hero to be a strong female lead. And it is a place for strong warrior princesses like Mulan, and more soft-spoken, gentle princesses like Cinderella. Strength doesn't always have to be about the traditional physical strength. And yes, her origin of being the seductive princess isn't exactly ideal, but we have to take into account her situation in contexts where being married was the only way out for women at that time. And despite all the adversity that she faced, she still was able to remain gentle and kind, rather than becoming a bitter woman like her stepmother. And even when Anastasia was going to steal away all of her happiness, Cinderella still found it in her heart to ask if that was actually what would make Anastasia happy.
He'll be perfectly happy.
But will you, Anastasia? Will you be happy? I want what you had. But do you even love him?
Love.
Caring for her more than her own mother ever did, and even protects Anastasia from her later in the movie. So Cinderella is an hysterical definition of strong, but she is also not the meek, feeble princess that people think she is. She is kind-hearted, hardworking, clever, and has a bit of sass.
Oh, that clock. Oh, Killjoy. I hear you. Come on, get up, you say. Time to start another day. Even he orders me around. I'm sorry if your highness objects to an early breakfast. It's certainly not my idea to feed you first. Maybe I should interrupt the music lesson. Lucifer has his good points, too. For one thing, there must be something good about him.
Girl is a thief.
I am not a thief! Well, I'm not gonna miss my own wedding.
Back to the story, Cinderella is able to free herself and send Lucifer into the pond below, which turns him back to a cat. It's also at this point that dawned me that all of this is all temporary. Like, the movie does such a great job of really heightening the stakes and making you feel so engrossed in the story that you completely forget the fact that all of this is supposedly going to end at midnight, because since the beginning, the fairy godmother's magic was never permanent and something that only lasted for a couple hours, excluding her glass slippers, which I think I remember reading somewhere that it's supposed to be like a symbol of her purity and her innocence, that that's the only thing that remains after the ball. But I don't really want to get into that. So we're just gonna say it's a parting gift from the fairy godmother, to explain that away, I suppose. And later in the movie, Lady Tremaine and Drusilla are turned into toads and then turned back into humans all on their own. But of course, Lady Tremaine has no idea of actually knowing that's the case, so it makes sense that she would completely believe that Anastasia would stay as the Cinderella clone for all of her life. But that makes me question, would that mean that Anastasia would just eventually have turned back on her own and the spell on the prince would have just dissipated, or would all of this have just gone back to normal? I mean, it's crazy to me that the fact that the fairy godmother's magic is able to bring them back in time anyways, so that whole thing is a little confusing, but we're just going to pretend that we didn't notice that because this movie is a little too perfect for loopholes, so let's get back to the story. Cinderella arrives at the castle while Anastasia prepares to walk down the aisle by the king, and once she's handed over to the prince, she starts to truly question her decision.
My one and only Cinderella.
In matrimony.
And ultimately decides not to go through with the wedding.
Don't.
Enraging her mother, who comes out of hiding and turns the guards into animals, before turning her side on Anastasia. Which, like I said, isn't as sinister now that we know that her magic isn't permanent. But Cinderella steps up to defend her, and the prince jumps in to protect them both, deflecting the magic onto Lady Tremaine and Drusilla, who are turned into toads. Anastasia picks up the wand and turns herself back, before the both of them restore the fairy godmother, and they choose to remain in this timeline and are once again happily wed. Anastasia apologizes to the king and attempts to return the seashell, not feeling worthy of it, but the king tells her everyone deserves true love. And I love that he chooses to forgive her and that they end up having a beautiful father-daughter relationship, something that Anastasia has never had before. And honestly, is one of my favorite things about this movie because it gave Anastasia a good role model and father figure, which makes him probably the only good adult influence in her life, and encourages her to follow her heart's desire, in this case love, rather than going after riches, as her mother did all her life.
True love.
Ha! Oh, please. It's love compared to the power we hold with a wand. Love. Look where it's gotten you.
And after she messed up and did wrong, the king decided to forgive her with open arms, rather than belittle her and threaten her as Lady Tremaine surely would have.
Spoiled little ingrate. I've given you everything you ever wanted, Anastasia.
But I want someone to love me for me.
And for those worried, she does get a happy ending with the first end credit painting showing her ending with the baker, which is so sweet. Now, to be honest, I haven't brought myself to watch the second Cinderella movie because I am aware of its existence. However, from the few things I've heard online, it seems to have a pretty mixed reaction, leaning towards negative.
Yeah, I caved while waiting for this video to upload, so I have watched the second Cinderella, and I just have to say, would not recommend. I heavily regretted that movie. It sucks, major ass, so maybe just skip out, like you're not missing much.
So for now, I'm perfectly content with just seeing this movie as the perfect sequel conclusion to Cinderella.
Also, there's really no place for me to put this in because it has no point, but I just thought it was really funny how often Prince Charming liked to twirl Cinderella around.
But all that being said, I've been me, aka miizmi, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye!